God spoke. Earth, generate life, every sort and kind, cattle and reptiles and wild animals, all kinds. And there it was, wild animals of every kind, cattle of all kinds, every sort of reptile and bug. God saw that it was good. God spoke, let us make human beings in our image, make them reflecting our nature, so they can be responsible for the fish in the sea, the birds in the air, the cattle, and yes, earth itself, and every animal that moves on the face of the earth. God created human beings. God created them godlike, reflecting God's nature. God created them male and female and blessed them. Prosper, reproduce, fill the earth, take charge. Be responsible for fish in the sea and birds in the air, for every living thing that moves on the face of the earth. October 4th is the feast day of St. Francis, the man from Assisi, Italy, who renounced his worldly goods and his hedonistic life to exemplify a life that reflected that of Jesus of Nazareth. He wore a simple robe tied with a rope at the waist, and he lived in what we might call selective poverty, among the poor and as the poor. It's reported that he, more than any other to his time, found God in the natural world. St. Francis is often portrayed holding a small chickadee-like bird in his hand. He knew that since God had created every creature, we humans were brothers and sisters with every other life form. World Animal Day is also October 4th, chosen by the International Animal Protection Congress in Florence, Italy, because it was the feast day of St. Francis. Francis was and still is considered the most devoted follower and truest emulator of the way Jesus wanted us to live. Humble, serving others, loving creation. In Francis' day, the creation story in Genesis was all he had. Science had not yet told us about nova stars and galaxies beyond our naked eyes. I don't think any of that would have mattered because Francis honored that all was from the higher intelligence we call God. Period. Welcome to Calm in the Chaos Interfaith Center, where today we ask, where did we come from and where are we going? It is written that when God created human beings, God made them in the image of God. So God made us all in the image of God. This idea is documented in the very first book in the Bible, in the Old Testament for our Christian friends, and the first book of the Pentateuch for our Jewish neighbors. It's called Genesis, the beginning. Genesis is a long book containing 50 chapters, and it takes us from the creation of our planet through many of the stories that people memorize from childhood. We meet Adam and Eve and their sons, Cain and Abel, from whom we receive the first biblical murder story. We meet Noah's Ark and Noah. We meet the great flood, the dove that he sends forth to find dry land, and it's all chronicled there in Genesis. We meet the 12 tribes of Israel, which give us the stories of Joseph's multicolored coat. The 12 tribes of Israel give us the story of Sarah and Abraham with their miraculous childbirth story. And then there's the day that Lot's wife looked back to the city that they had just left, and she was turned into a pillar of salt. Spicy stories of incest follow that one because of Lot's daughters, but today's God Talk has another focus. We'll do that one another day. Scholars mostly agree that the words of Genesis were written by Moses. Moses, the Hebrew prophet, teacher, and leader, lived in the 14th and 13th centuries BC, or before the Common Era. There is some controversy about this authorship, with some more recent scholars suggesting that Genesis was authored between the 6th and 5th centuries BC, which would be hundreds of years after Moses was on the earth. A third theory places authorship on a Hebrew scribe living in Babylon during the 4th century BC, who created a new creation story to align with the monotheistic movement that was taking hold in Babylon at that time. One God who made everything, that idea. Well, no matter which of these theories is correct, one thing is for sure. Whoever authored the book of Genesis wasn't there when the earth was formed. He would have lived about 300 years after the stories in Genesis ended. The creation story is just that. It's a story. It's a story. Now, it's difficult for me to think today of a world with nothing plugged into a wall or batteries, nothing at all. All music was live. There were no books or printed words, except for a scribe handwriting something. All stories and news were passed from one person to the next orally. And people spent their days balancing staying alive with trying to appease the gods so that they could avoid plagues and disease and floods. Jewish history being what it is, I've learned that the oral tradition of storytelling probably didn't lose a lot over the years because of the great respect for the history of the Jewish people. It reminds me of the Viking sagas and how children are expected to read those stories of their heritage, so much so that there is a 0 illiteracy rate in Iceland because of it. People who have a long history tend to want to keep it accurate, I have found. Scientists at National Geographic tell us that the Earth wasn't always a hospitable place for life. It began as a gathering of dust and gases, and eventually an occurrence that has not been unquestionably defined allowed that dust and gas to form all the planets, including Earth, with life forms eventually using the oxygen, hydrogen, and dust particles to create and sustain their existence on Earth. This isn't exactly how Moses described it, but he didn't have National Geographic scientists to consult with. So even if he was trying to tell the stories of Noah, Abraham, and Eve, there's that pesky creation story about how the world and all its moving parts came into existence. Now, most faith traditions have a creation story, a tale of how there was nothing and then there was the earth and stars and animals and such. The children's video that's recommended today is the Cherokee creation story. It's worth your time. So here we are, grappling with religion versus science. Or are we? Can't these two coexist? I mean, really, now that we know so much more about molecules and atoms and the ever-changing, always adapting life forms, should we just toss the Genesis creation story on a shelf with children's fairy tales? No. There is merit in having a creation story. It grounds us. It gives meaning to the whole human and earth connection. But creation stories that involve magic turtles and giant eagles and perfect gardens are not to be taken literally. It's all metaphor. And seen as such, we connect science with religion. When Genesis tells us of a perfect garden where all is in balance and nothing is ever negative, we can equate that to a heavenly presence, a spiritual place where, if we chose to be in balance with nature and with one another, true peace would be created in our world again. We can return to Eden, if you will, by making choices that are connection, non-divisive, harmonious, and life-affirming decisions. When Genesis speaks of 6 days, what if the word day meant, metaphorically, a portion of time? That the creation story was in a certain order, but each day was an eon of undetermined length. And the word day was used to help the story make sense. When the words were written, there was no knowledge of nova stars and planets and galaxies. All the people knew was what was visible to their own eyes. They saw stars, but they had no understanding of what they actually were. What if the Eve and Adam part was simply a way to describe to people how humans originated? Remember, this was written for and by people who didn't understand the details of sperm and egg. They knew that new humans could come forth from a woman's body and that she bled regularly every now and then, while these things did not happen to men. This explains how women were called unclean when they were bleeding. Little sidebar here, if you haven't yet read Anita Diamond's Red Tent, I strongly suggest that you do so. It's not new, but it's eye-opening. Second sidebar, grab a book, any book, children's book, gardening, novel, anything, and join Pat and me for Bookshare every month. It's on the second Saturday of the month, 9:30 in the morning. Jammies, bring your breakfast, bring your books, and surprise us on October 9th. Back to our story. I was speaking about Adam and Eve, and whenever I say the two names together, I cannot help but hear my righteous and homophobic friends spew one of their clobber passages. It's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. Well, maybe not. Or maybe. You see, there's one more point about the whole Genesis creation story that I'll offer. The words say that God created heaven and earth, light and darkness, day and night, seas and earth, sun and moon, man and woman. A lot of binary creations, this and that, black and white. This week, I saw a meme that said, Adam and Eve had 2 sons, and then the rest of humanity came forth. Think about that. It's a naive attempt to make us disprove the Bible had merit, implying that Eve was the only woman, and then she had to make all the rest of the babies, which would make her incestuous. But remember, this is metaphor, and it's also a story that we've dug in our heels for over the centuries. So I say, sure, God made Adam and Eve, but God also created 1,000 other people in the very next second. The Bible just simplified the story. Or maybe science is right about evolution, which makes the idea of the creation story being metaphor or soft fiction more appealing. And when confronted with the Adam and Steve comment, I ask that we consider all of those dualistic creations. Each this and that seems to cover how the world and its inhabitants all got here, but it's just not that simple. There are other options in each case. Water and earth, for instance. If those are the only 2 creations, the only 2 choices, what do you call a marsh or a swamp? Both of which are earth and water. How about sun and moon? When the story was written, there was no knowledge of other suns and other moons. Telescopes didn't exist. It's just not as simple as the story. And so it is with Adam and Eve, male and female. God created them, but not only male and female. The day after Eden was created, what if God created all variations of human gender and sexuality? Variations of human brain power, a lot of variations of human skills and gifts. It's worth opening our thoughts to mature out of seeing the 7 days of creation story as pure truth and allowing ourselves to see the metaphors and historical context in which the story was created. What Genesis doesn't expound upon is that humans were humans, no matter if we began as evolutionary outgrowths of the same gene pool as apes, or if we began with 2 people in a perfect garden. One thing is for sure. Humans were not begun as separate groups because of politics, race, wealth, or religion. In the beginning, there were humans. On day 6 of our creation story, God created people. Not Presbyterians or New Yorkers or Republicans or millionaires or Muslims or Pacific Islanders. People. We all sprang from the same roots. Archaeologists who have studied fossils and DNA tell us that modern humans all began in Africa at least 250,000 years ago. Humans. Homo sapiens. Brothers and sisters. It is we who have created the divisions, treated one another poorly, and dug our heels in, pitting person against person. Perhaps it's time for us to remember our Genesis story, where we began, and behave in a way that returns us to our metaphorical Eden, wherever that may be. Let's pray. Holy Creator, Abun de Bashmaya, we come to you as humble and grateful people. We know it matters not how we came to be, as much as it matters that we are made in your image, your heart, your mind, your love, and recognize that within each of us. May our likeness to you reflect well on this creation. We humbly acknowledge that there is much we do not know about creation, and we accept that we do not need to know in order to live our lives in love. Be with the people who have been in the path of the hurricane. Shelter them from further harm and use us to help them. Hear our whispered private prayers. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace and blessings to us all. Amen. Our music recommendation is a song that says, I prayed and I cried and I didn't really get an answer, so I'm just waiting and listening to the rain and listening to the rain. It's sung and it was composed by a woman named Liz Fulmer, and she and I took Charlotte for a walk yesterday, and I think you'll enjoy this song. Blessings on all.